How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the Conscious Bodybuilding Podcast. Today, I have Dr. Pac Androlakis Korakakis, a
Spot
real
on.
doctor, not a medical doctor. Hashtag PhDs are the real doctors. Thanks for coming on the show, man.
Thank you. God bless the PhDs. That's the new bullshit.
Yes,
I'm
sir.
saying I find it so arrogant, which makes it extremely funny. But I know that eventually it will backfire because people will be like, "You really mean it, right?" And then that sort of makes me want to trigger people more. So then I'll be like, "No," but then I'll be like, "Actually, yeah, I do mean it." And then I'll just, I'm doomed now. I'm that guy. But yeah, thank
Lean
you so
into
much for
it.
having me.
Yeah, of course, man. Lean into it because I really do feel like your YouTube, with the consistency will blow up. And I think you should really lean into it there because that controversy just breeds the views. So
Bro, it's crazy how it's an actual like when I got the like my mother has a PhD, and obviously like when I was studying for the PhD was the constant joke among academics that we're you're gonna be a doctor soon. And I hadn't realized that it's an actual like legit debate in the literature where there's like papers going over the title and why academics are indeed the real doctors. And I was like, okay, so there are people out there that spend a significant portion of their day arguing about whether it's only the academics that should be called doctors or it's just the physicians.
yeah, I think I heard you mention that maybe in a video, but it's in part because they're the ones doing the research that the doctors are using? Is that what it is? Or
Allow me to quote the infamous paper, Whom Should We Really Call a Doctor? By Ashouf and Winter, published in the Canadian Medical Association Journal. It's essentially an argument about the fact that the title doctor originates from the Latin word docere, which means to teach or to be a scholar. And the title doctor was essentially was originally an academic title. So that's true. Like it originated as an academic title, and then it sort of became, it became a title that other professions borrowed, and it then became associated with, medicine. But obviously, like you're a licensed physician, like officially, people are not like a licensed doctor. So, the whole argument there is that people hate on academics for not being real doctors because rightfully so. When you say is there a doctor here, most people, if we want to be realists, are not expecting you to talk about your thesis. They're asking for medical assistance. But if we want to be pedantic about it, yeah, the title is an academic title, blah 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 blah.
I got a meme for you. Okay, so it's a plane. Maybe you've already done this. You're on a plane and someone's like, "Who is there a doctor here?" And then you're standing up in the back saying, "Yes. Does anybody need minimum effective dose for hypertrophy?"
Exactly. I've made the joke on YouTube where the person is there dying, and I'm on top of saying, "Look, 1 to 3 sets per week. It's more than enough. Please help me."
That's perfect. I really think that the debate, how most debates should be settled in modern day, should just be settled in the octagon. MD versus PhD.
Are you a man of culture? Are you a UFC fan?
I'm not actually. I mean, at least
Okay.
I've never watched UFC.
It's very fun to watch. I'm not a combat sports sort of guy. Like I'm a casual viewer, but as somebody who's not into martial arts in general, UFC was like, oh, so you get to see these two dudes just fight and do whatever they want. Okay. Especially if there's hype building up. Super
Yeah,
interesting.
especially if it's a medical doctor versus a PhD.
That would be nice, though. That would be nice.
Yeah. Anyway, let's get into some topics of discussion here today. So I kind of with all the guests I have on here, I really do think a lot of podcast hosts miss this, but I really do want to know what got you into lifting originally, and then what made you want to pursue this as an academic as well, like
Yeah.
so, surrounding lifting.
Yeah, sure. So just just to just to put it out there, I am just a lifter. I'm not a bodybuilder and I'm not a power lifter. I have power lifted, and I mean my life is a competitive bodybuilding season. It's living as Dr. Pack is essentially being a competitive bodybuilder, which is another dumb joke I make. But joking aside, I'm not a bodybuilder or a power lifter. I'm just a guy that loves lifting. And I got into lifting In 2010, I lived in Germany at the time, and I went to a boarding school, and I was in the same room as with one of my best friends now, Ilyas, who is from Azerbaijan but grew up in Russia, and he was very heavily into his martial arts. So he grew up in like a not in a fighting family, but he grew up with a father that taught him how to fight and how to lift and stuff. And at some point, we bought a pair of dumbbells for our room, and we started doing like random curls before bed. Like that was the workout for the first couple of months. And as a non-athletic kid who tried to play football, aka soccer, tried basketball, tried rugby, and okay, and it wasn't like I was horrible at them, but they never clicked. I then started going to the school gym with my friend, and I realized that, oh, this is nice. I'm finally able to push myself hard in an environment and in how should I put this? Like I was always intimidated by cardio, like running specifically and being heavily out of breath. That never appealed to me. But with lifting, I was like, oh, I can push myself hard for 20 to 30 seconds, like my sex life, and then take it easy for a bit and then not go again and leave crying and go somewhere else. But no, but in the gym, I could just do that, and I just liked it a lot. And I saw that I was not as genetically unblessed as I thought I was. Like I responded relatively well to lifting weights. Not elite genetics by no means, but certain milestones came relatively quick. And yeah, that was it. I then got bit by the iron bug, and lifting became a huge part of my life and the reason why I'm still here. Lifting taught me a lot of things, and I'm a very big fan of lifting.
Awesome, man. And so then how did that transition into academia? Like what made you want to go that route?
Yeah, I was never a good student because I didn't care much for school. I was heavily into computers though. I was big into like security, cybersecurity, hacking, a bit of coding. I had multiple websites and like forums back in the day, back in like 2006, 2007. And we were like I was on YouTube actually rapping, like doing parody raps in 2008, bro.
Oh wow.
150,000 views in 2008
Let's
for the
go.
younguns out there. And I also rap as well. That's something many people don't know. Um, but yeah, we were always doing shit. Like we weren't losers that were bad at school and were out there just. But I was never a kid that could go to school and do math. I wasn't interested. I wasn't doing it. So when I got into lifting, as somebody who really enjoyed, who was self-taught in computers and liked to search for stuff and be like, okay, I want to make this program. What code? How should I code? This is not working. Let's Google. Like, and I would be spending hours and hours on Google searching for stuff. When I got into lifting, that sort of mentality transferred there, and I started getting familiar with science, and I was like, okay, this seems like a solid tool to inform parts of my training. And when it came time to go to university, I was like, oh, maybe since I like lifting, sports science is something that I want to do. And I essentially did a bachelor's degree. I pursued a bachelor's degree here in the UK in fitness and personal training, which was essentially sports science, the same modules as the sports science course, plus some practical courses. And yeah, that's where I met my mentors, James Steele and James Fisher, who then got me into research, and I started falling in love with the research side of things. It was very cool to be behind the scenes, sort of getting closer to the truth and getting closer to the why behind lifting. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, man. And I gotta commend you for the research that you are doing because it's very practical and I feel like you are approaching a lot of the questions that a lot of us lifters want to know. So it's really for myself as a coach, as a bodybuilder, being able to have some more empirical um answers to some of these questions that we have is really cool. So yeah, I mean, obviously, thank you for pursuing that because it's helping me as a coach. So
Did you just come up with a new the new tagline? Thank you for your service. God bless the
thank you for your service.
PhDs.
Yes. I'm gonna
uh,
start on my YouTube videos. I'm gonna start ending out with God bless the PhDs, the real doctors.
Thank you. But yeah, I appreciate it, and that's essentially what drives me as a researcher. For many people on social media don't know that like we're not employed, like we're affiliated with universities, but I'm not a like a researcher in terms of my full-time job. But I want to leave a bunch of work behind that other lifters that and research on things that may not be of any great importance to the greater good, right? Like learning whether, hey, whatever, resting 30 seconds or 2 minutes between each sets allows you to get that extra centimeter of muscle mass. I mean, it's not going to inform public health policy, is it? But I want to leave stuff behind for other lifters who got so much out of lifting as I did. And, I appreciate you saying that. It means a lot.
Yeah, yeah, no, I appreciate the work you do, man. This is not a loaded question by any means, but I do think it'll kind of like set the ground here for the follow-up question. Uh, would you define yourself as an evidence-based lifter?
Yeah, for sure.
And what would you say constitutes being an evidence-based lifter?
Yeah, that's a great question. Uh, Being an evidence-based lifter essentially revolves around three, three sources of data that inform your practices. One, the base is set by the science, and then you also have your experience. In my case, I also coach people and I borrow from that, but also my experience as a lifter, because there's many things that we haven't really figured out from a scientific perspective. And then you essentially triangulate all that data, and depending on how much data you have from each sort of aspect, you weigh that data differently. So let's say up until recently we had zero studies on deloads. So as an evidence-based lifter, I'm gonna slightly draw from the literature in terms of studies on detraining and this and that and the other. Use that, use not put a whole lot of stock on those studies, and then mostly rely on practical experience. What other coaches have been doing, YouTube videos of experienced sort of coaches that go on about their experiences with deloading, and that's what constitutes an evidence-based approach. People um, often assume that evidence based means, oh, there I take the science and I only look at the science, I don't consider any of its limitations, and whatever the latest meta-analysis found, this is exactly what I'll be doing and what I'll be prescribing, which is not the case.
Yeah. You coach, correct, Pac?
Mm. Full time up until recently. So I've been for the
Awesome.
past 2-3 years working with a lot of people, but I don't like it's not on social media, so people don't really know that it's been happening so much behind the scenes.
Yeah, yeah. Stronger by Science?
Yes, I was coaching for Stronger by Science.
Sweet. So I think one thing that I just thought of there is that how much being a coach has, because I was leaning very heavily into the evidence prior to having a lot of clients, and then I became a coach and I started to kind of learn the relationship between what I was observing with clients, what was practically what they able to adhere to practically, and then what the research said. Did you have any of those realizations when becoming a coach?
Yeah, 100%, man. Great example is gauging proximity to failure. So we had published a paper which reviewing the literature, which essentially showed that based on the current literature, which usually was in studies with an acute design, so not long-term studies where people were followed and judged on their ability to gauge proximity to failure, but based on the current evidence, we had seen that most people are somewhat like inaccurate in predicting their repetitions in reserve by approximately one repetition, regardless of training status. However, as a coach and having worked with hundreds of individuals, because obviously, like if you're a coach and you've worked with 5 people, you got to be very careful with, obviously, even if you worked with hundreds of individuals, you got to be cautious with how you interpret that data. But having worked with a lot of people, I was like, in practice, um, and especially in the context of online coaching where you're not physically present there, that like the literature is not really supporting my observations here. Like I've had many clients and highly trained clients who would send me videos with their lifts, and I'd be like, I think you had at least 5 reps left when that person had said, that was failure. And then the next week they would try and AMRAP the same load and they would indeed get 5 more reps. So that was a really good example of where we had directly done, like we were the ones behind the literature, the evidence, the scientific evidence, but my practical experience actually went against that, and I had to, again, place a different sort of weight on the scientific evidence and sort of calibrate my knowledge based on my experience without saying, nope, that's what the evidence says, and I'm going to ignore what I'm seeing here.
Yeah, there was a quote that I saw. Jeff Bezos did an interview recently with Lex Friedman, and he mentioned when your observations don't match your data, reanalyze your data. And I don't know how much truth there is in all circumstances, but there definitely is, like, maybe some truth. I do think that, like, when we do start to have a lot of data accumulating on a topic, like you had mentioned, maybe leaning into that a little bit more because of your anecdotes being, the quality of that evidence, the sample size, all that stuff is very small. So, generally speaking, when you have controlled studies, uh, generally leaning into that, but also using experience to inform your practice.
100%. And it's a bit tricky because, like, we have to understand also that our observations come baked with a whole lot of limitations, survivorship bias, blah 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 blah. But depending on the context, being truly evidence based means that you have to ask yourself those questions and not constantly recalibrate, but often have that check in where you go, okay, I've been doing this way because of the science. Does this really match with what I'm seeing in practice? If you're a practitioner or even if you're just a lifter, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't want to lean too heavily into that quote. I thought it was an interesting quote, but uh, I
For
think
sure.
that there is something that's circulating a lot with a lot of these studies coming out, particularly with the research on length and bias training, where there are lifters now on the kind of, like, if we were to make camps, the bro sciencey side saying, look, bodybuilders were right all along, but I think they're missing the amount of times that bodybuilders were wrong about things and that science, like empirical data, disproved a lot of the stuff lifters were doing. Do you have any
Yeah,
comments on that?
yeah, for sure, man. Like, I don't feel like this like that comment adds when people make that comment, that it adds too much, because it's like, okay, obviously, like, we're not talking about rocket science here, where you had those people say, okay, this is the, predicting the future and being like, this is how we have electric cars, and they were saying it in the 60s, and they had developed the electric engine, and people were like, ah, you're crazy. Maybe that happened. I don't know. But it's like, one, science confirmed that they were indeed right for some things, and at the same time, they also had, as you said, many practices that uh, were completely debunked, and many common practices, including, shortened bias training, a lot of dietary practices, the squats build your upper body because of growth hormone, a lot of stuff. Like, you can find a bunch of shit that people were doing or are still doing at the highest level and are not right. But yeah, the fact that we can learn a lot from the practices of high level athletes and coaches. I do believe that. And we're trying to do that in our research by doing interviews and so on and so forth. However, splitting people into camps, it's like, bro, we're all lifters here. We're all trying to get jacked. If you have a solid argument for why X, Y, Z may work, that's another thing that people miss. When bodybuilders do something and they feel that it works, many times you don't get a sufficient explanation for why it works. So it's different if you, as a bodybuilder, come to me now and say, Pack, here's why I think XYZ is good. We don't have direct evidence, but here are a few mechanisms. Here's, I don't know, some other data from other studies that haven't directly explored this. And this is my rationale for believing that whatever, this practice is better than the other practice. That's different to saying, yeah, bro, the stretch feels great, therefore it's good, because other things feel great but don't end up being good. Like, again, if I grab one of those barbells behind me now and do a bunch of shortened partials at 30 reps in reserve, now I'm gonna get a nice pump and it's gonna feel good. but that's not, a solid rationale for me to tell you, yeah, this is it, you know?
Yep. Yeah, I hear that. So, kind of on that same topic, and I agree with the camps. I think that we shouldn't be splitting camps. I do think we should identify, like in that case, I think it's a lot of like confirmation bias. Like someone has a
Mm-hmm.
specific lifting style or specific lifter that they just have attached their whole training ideology to. And anytime they see something coming out, look, we were right about this. The way I tend to like to look at it is, I'll go watch old video. I mean, I'm very much into like 90s bodybuilding. Flex Wheeler's the person who got me into bodybuilding originally. And I look at any of those videos and I just kind of just like start to say, like, well, look at all of the things they're doing similarly, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them are training with sufficient volume. Uh, a lot of them are, I mean, they're doing exercises that target the specific muscles they're trying to target. They're training, you know, there is intensity with their training. Like there's a lot of similarities, but then when you start to split hairs and look at like, well, this guy did this and this guy did this, and it's very difficult to say if that's the reason why they're successful, especially when you talk about like, these individuals having elite genetics on tons of gear. Like what's actually driving the adaptation there?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's useful to do so, but at the same time, that's where being evidence based comes in play. So you can G check some of those things with the science and be like, okay, does it somewhat align with what the science says? Is the science enough? So do we have enough data? For example, like on training volume. Like we do see bodybuilders, they like most bodybuilders don't do 3 sets per muscle group per week. And you see that most of them train with moderate, high, and then you have the very high training volumes. From a scientific perspective, you get a check. You're like, yep, that seems to be more than fine. But then on other topics, because I've heard people say success leaves clues, it's like, okay, we gotta be a bit mindful because like people will say, rows, heavy cheat rows for a thick back. And it's like, okay, man, like you get a bodybuilder who's an elite genetic freak who also does 300 other exercises for their back. And we're trying to isolate that the one exercise that they're all doing and they all told each other that it's the best. And then they kept doing it. And you're like, okay, maybe there's not much talk here, you know?
Yeah, I hear that. So with that being said, I think there's a lot of pushback on um specifically chasing optimal, and I think some of it is warranted. But how important is chasing optimal training for lifters, do you think?
It's bro, it's like with like I don't get why people are losing their minds. First of all, it's not like public health guidelines are telling people, hey, unless you are making every educated bet you can to gain as much muscle as possible, theoretically, you're wasting your time. Like we are out there. I am out there constantly telling people, hey, make sure you just consistently lift, do the basics. That's going to get you the majority of results. But the chase of optimal is a chase that doesn't necessarily end you or like you never reach the point where like, or at least we may do in 100 years, we may and reach a point where we know for a fact that 1, 2, and 3, this is the most optimal way to train because we've done thousands of studies on thousands of people. But I think that's very unlikely to happen. So it's a chase that keeps things interesting, and it's fine. It's like we are essentially in an echo chamber. We're all hobbyists. We are geeks about lifting and geeks about gaining as much muscle mass as possible. We have established, both in the literature and anecdotally by observation, that hey, you can get pretty damn jacked. You can get insane. You can be insanely muscular without necessarily knowing everything there is to know about muscle building. And it's just a fun journey where you can, geek out about lifting and tell yourself, okay, I've made every educated bet I can, the same way you would do with other hobbies and other sports, and I don't get why people are losing their minds because it's usually free content that is out there. The message is usually, not usually, most times, always the basics are what's going to get you all the results. Oh, sorry for the effect. The
No, no,
basics
that's
are
perfect.
The
It works
basics
really
are
well.
what's going to get you most of your results. Here's some stuff, sometimes speculative, that you can play around to, have fun with your trading and tell yourself, ooh, maybe I'm making 1% more gain here. But like, nobody's out there telling you you're not going to make gains if you just do, even if you do like the most basic 5x5 program with 5 accessories. You do that for 10 years, you're going to be more jacked than the average gym goer for sure.
Yeah, yeah, doing the basics consistently over time. I think what happens is people misinterpret the the what's the term I'm looking
The
for?
context.
Not the context, but like the magnitude of effect that some of these little
Mm.
nuanced things that we're talking about have. Like you'd have to be adding a caveat to every post you make when you're talking about training in 3 RIR versus 2 RIR. Like, hey, this
Yeah,
is a
bro.
very nuanced debate and it doesn't matter. And I think you do this with your content a lot, but a lot of people don't. And so they're thinking like look at this nerd who's focusing on this thing that doesn't matter, blah 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 blah. And it's like, dude, we're doing this because we want to have a discussion on high level. We care about maximizing that very small percentage that may not even be there, but we just the idea of it is very enticing to individuals who are interested in research, interested in making the best gains they possibly can. That's how I kind of try to view it, but it's hard because of social media and the way this stuff gets presented often.
Yeah, I don't think it's only the presentation. I think it's also the like human nature of, oh, we gotta go against something now. There's a big conspiracy, and it's like,
Camps, yeah,
bro, bro, in every sport, like in elite sports, you know how many small practices they have that there's zero data behind them that do anything. But still, like in that context, when you're an elite bodybuilder and your life depends on your life, or maybe your livelihood in your head, maybe your happiness or whatever your meaning depends on whether you can get your bicep slightly bigger, there's absolutely no harm, and it may be meaningful to you to do those few extra advanced training techniques or do the extra stretch or pause at the bottom or whatever, because worst case scenario, you you won't make any additional gains that you would have made anyways, and you won't be spending a ton of time. Best case scenario, that slight increase might make a difference. Same with strength sport athletes, but people don't lose their mind with strength sports because strength sports are much more like chill. Like you have powerlifters there that care about that zero point 0.5 kilo on the bar, which for most people, or like the extra 5 pounds they will gain on their total, those guys will work an extra year. They will be in the gym for 2 3 hours for that 5 kilo difference, because that's a meaningful difference for them. But nobody's out there advocating that, hey, average gym goer, unless you're doing those things, you're an idiot and you're wasting your time. But like, you can't make that disclaimer all the time. I try to do it, but I get how like people that make this sort of content is like, okay, guys, I am a fucking, you can see my profile picture. I look like I need to visit the vet. Like I am a pro bodybuilder. All my content is, huge me flexing and talking about bodybuilding. We've established that we're not talking about your average individual here. There's no need for the disclaimers constantly.
yeah, very true. No, well, the thing that disappoints me often is that a lot of the people I see shouting this, obviously there's like just your average individual, but there's also, or the guy without a profile picture on social media, but there's also these high level lifters who bodybuilders and who do this, and I think more bodybuilders on the higher level are becoming aware of this, and you can
Mm-hmm.
truly see the individuals who are invested in becoming better as a competitor starting to embrace some of this research. But you also have individuals who have never needed to actually use any of this data to instruct their training because they are so genetically gifted and because they've masked it with high level anabolics. They're a lot of the time the ones saying, hey, you guys don't need to worry about any of this stuff if you want to be a high level competitor. Look at me, kind of deal. So that's where it kind of
Yeah.
disappoints me. And I think that if you are a competitor, and a lot of these people, if there it is their livelihood, obviously the messaging is a little bit different. But yeah, I don't know. It's some of the, I guess, contradiction I see going on.
That's a fair point though, and I did miss that. That yeah, you also get the other extreme where, like, yeah, if you're a genetic freak, and like I have a social circle where we're not genetic freaks, but we're all blessed. Like having like a 500-pound deadlift doesn't mean much in my circle. of friends. It really doesn't. Even if a squad is pretty much like, oh, okay, nice, whatever. But like you get out of your echo chamber or your circle, you see that for a lot of lifters out there, even competitive lifters, and if you start looking at like if you go on strengthcheck.me and compare those numbers with all the powerlifters in the world, you start to realize that, oh, okay, you may be in the 80th percentile. And the idea that, oh, yeah, you're wasting your time because it's the basics only. Okay, yeah, if you're the genetic freak who can get away with anything, that's not really a solid stance. Plus, as long as it's communicated and it's understood that the basics need to be in place, then there's no issue whatsoever with going the extra mile, as long as you're not neurotic about it. That's where people lose the ball. Like when I see the
Yeah.
question there by the relatively untrained individual who's been lifting for 6 months asking a lot of questions about exercise selection, I get triggered. But at the same time, I have to also appreciate that maybe they just have fun and they're not really neurotic, and it's just that we're reading the question on YouTube and we're not listening to that person speak. But yeah, if yeah, okay, I said what I had to say.
Yeah. Maybe it's the individuals. I kind of have this thought. Maybe the individuals who go to bodybuilding already have some neurotic tendencies, and the bodybuilding and
Mm.
the control lifestyle is why they are there. Also, they look at their favorite bodybuilders, and their favorite bodybuilders are neurotic about things that don't matter. Like they're on a meal plan that their coach prescribed them, and they're like, "Hey, you need to eat chicken and rice each meal and broccoli." And they see that, and they're like, "This is what makes you successful," forgetting that this is a genetically blessed individual. They're neurotic about certain other things, but yeah, I don't know what it is there. Maybe it's a little bit of both, but
Yeah. And that's where the ball is lost. But like you'll get that regard. There's no point. There's no way you won't have those individuals as well,
yeah,
in that discussion.
100%. So so and obviously like optimal training, I think you've made content around this, but for most individuals, I would say they're it's important to understand the basic principles that are going to drive progress. And honestly, I think even with my more advanced competitor clients, I actually spend a lot more time focusing on the basic principles and helping them adhere more than I do on the nuanced things. But I think for most individuals, they are best served on focusing on those bigger pillars. And like if you're like, oh, I'm at a gym and I can't get none of all the machines are hammer strength and I can't get length and bias training and oh, my workout's going to be horrible and blah 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 blah. Like I think that is a little bit in the other direction, maybe not the best way to approach it, I guess.
100%, man. And that's where like G checking yourself and being like, okay, man, yeah, it's the same with any other hobby. If maybe if I don't know if you're into investing, like if you've done all the basics and whatever, you missed out on that one stock, or I don't know, I'm using this analogy.
Yeah,
Like you're not gonna be poor. It's gonna be fine. Yeah, maybe
right.
it's not ideal. Yeah, it would be better if you had the prime row. Maybe it feels better, but you can definitely make it work. Even if you just had a barbell and some dumbbells, you could I would argue you could get 90, like you could optimize there as well with a few minor adjustments.
Absolutely. Yeah, most definitely. And I think leaning too hard in the other direction can also well take the enjoyment out of training and also just kind of don't lose the forest through the trees, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You recently you've been involved in a few studies on deloads, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yes.
So I guess a good question would be are deloads necessary for maximum muscle growth?
Um, so this will be my opinion based on, so we've done some studies where we've interviewed coaches and athletes, and we've also surveyed athletes, and there's been one intervention study that was done that was led by Max Coleman. Shout out Max. That was the first sort of deload intervention study to ever be done to set sort of the scene for deload the deload literature. I would say yeah, if you're trying to maximize your gains, in theory, if you make it your life's purpose to never deload, maybe you can get away without deloads if like you really really like do your absolute best to pre-plan your training in a way where you're going to be managing fatigue constantly. But then I would say that if you're somebody who's trying to get as jacked and as strong as possible, because you'll have to push your training pretty hard, and because being the hypothetical that I just mentioned is one unrealistic, and two will take too much planning, and I could also see it backfiring by you not training as hard sometimes or leaving potential, small but still meaningful gains on the table. I'd say that deloading at some point will be necessary if you're somebody trying to get as jacked as humanly possible. However, I do think that if you want to be big and strong and jacked, so very strong and very jacked, like way above your like average gym goer, traditionally planning deloads and having like a meticulously pre-planned deload phase or even taking full-on deload weeks may not be necessary. And you can still make insane gains, but you will have the occasional week where you go to the gym, you do like half of your workout, then you do the other workout, you do the full workout the other day, then you skip one of your days. And it essentially is sort of like a bastardized deload, but not a proper deload in the sense that, it's easy training and stuff. You'll still do a few hard sets, but training volume will be much lower, and then you'll eventually rest a bit more. Or you'll get the odd week where you're sick and then you have a week off, or you'll have a holiday, and it sort of auto regulates itself without you strictly saying, okay, deload now.
Yeah, yeah, I'm actually really glad you said that because I think uh speaking on the enhanced bodybuilder side, I think a lot of bodybuilders that don't say they don't take deloads end up doing some sort of thing like this, like they're traveling or whatever, and you start to look at it and you're like, that's technically a deload that you did that week where you were like traveling and didn't train, and or you did half your workouts or whatever it might be. You did two workouts instead of, you know what I mean? So I think this auto
100%.
regul this deloading actually tends to occur whether the individual doesn't realize they're doing it, whether the individual a lot of time they'll maybe they'll get injured, so they take time off of the gym. Like something happens to where they're taking time out of the gym, and they're deloading in some capacity.
100%. And it's the idea, like I would bet a solid amount of money that there's not a lot of individuals in the world that won't have those few weeks in their year where training does take a hit for one reason or the other. People have families, people have obligations, things happen outside the gym, and people are busy. So I think people do will deload regardless of whether they call it a deload or not. I am, however, not a huge fan of overly like forcing the deload if you don't need one, unless you have a very strict competitive calendar and you've laid out a plan that makes sense for you, and you're a highly competitive power lifter, and you know that, hey, especially I assume on the enhanced side, there's other things that you need to consider. From the enhancement point of view, maybe it makes sense for your connective tissue and your joints because blah 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 something something. It makes sense that, okay, I'll take it easy now because I know that I've been, I'm feeling a bit rough. I'm still fine in the gym, and I don't feel like I can feel. I still feel like I can push myself, but probably best to not snap my shit up.
Yep. Just for everybody listening, I'm a natural lifter, so I have no idea what Pac's talking about. No, no. Actually, on the enhanced side, I think there's actually some rationale for it. For example, sometimes when you implement pharmacology, the strength will come up really quickly, and I actually
That's what
tend
I was
to
thinking.
have, yeah, yeah, and I'll tend to have clients like be like, oh yeah, this lift went up 20 pounds this week, and I'm kind of like, yeah, I know you can do 20 more pounds, but like maybe it serves you best to like spread that out over the accumulation phase, and then maybe when we take a deload, when we come back, we can use a little bit more load, like just kind of like averaging things out and allowing their connective tissues a break, especially when there's an implementation of pharmacology. So yeah, no, I actually do hear that, especially in the competitive calendar. I generally do pre-plan, knowing like, okay, I'm going to deload here. I know I'm going to peak on my deload this time, so that definitely is some consideration. And I think, and I don't know what so you're generally saying this is an auto-regulated deload process, meaning like like what are some of the things you look out for that you would say a lifter would need a deload?
Yeah, so I think things are pretty straightforward when it comes to deloading. Like if you're seeing that your performance is continuously regressing, and I would say for like a solid 1 to 2 weeks, because you can have days where things feel meh, and then all of a sudden you have another 4 weeks of amazing training in you. So calling it too early may not make that ton of sense, but paying attention at your performance, soreness, and perception of recovery outside the gym, so overall fatigue and how you're sleeping, obviously irritability and just your mood in general, triangulating all those different variables. I think it's not that difficult to know when you need a deload. I think all of us lifters who train hard and love to push ourselves every session, we do know relatively well, especially if we love training. If you love training and you want to be in the gym, you know that okay, like it's been a shit, like I had a shit week last week. I didn't feel like training whatsoever. This week I forced the one session, didn't match reps, had to reduce the load, had to fight to finish a relatively easy upper body session. Maybe it's time that I take my foot off the gas. And the literature shows you that, worst case scenario, nothing bad is going to happen if you have a light week of training. So it's really not that deep.
Yeah, yeah. On that, I think it's worth mentioning. Nothing bad's going to happen if you have a bad week of training. And maybe I'm misinterpreting this, but there in that study with Coleman and colleagues, there wasn't a major difference in muscle growth when they had a cessation week of training in the middle versus training for 9 consecutive weeks. So they didn't
Yeah.
really lose out on gains by taking that week off ish of
No.
training, right?
That's another fear mongering sort of thing that we see often in our circles. The idea that, you're going to lose muscle. Like, bro, unless you take a month off and you do absolutely nothing, you're not gonna risk. Even then, you may lose something that you'll easily gain back. But the idea that a week off, especially if you still implement some form of light training, like you're covered, bro. Especially on the enhanced side, right? Your body's not like, okay,
Oh, dude.
let me burn this tissue now because you didn't train for 4 days.
No, the trend's got you covered. Trust me.
Exactly.
I actually like kind of got emotional when you said that because used to be so fucking neurotic that I'd be on vacation and be worried about losing muscle and I'd have all my meals with me and I'd have to go find a gym. And it's just like, dude, my life is so much fucking better now that I'm just like on vacation and I'm just on vacation. Like, do I train today? Maybe, maybe not. I got all my protein in. I'm chilling. Like, even if I didn't,
Exactly.
like, who gives a fuck? I mean, like,
And
God, my quality of life is just so much better now.
that's it, man. And I think that you can make an argument there for that potentially, like I'm being super speculative now, but like that lowering your stress
Yes,
significantly may be more important than you stressing. Plus, with all the research that we have on lifting and like low volume training, even if you got the one session in that week and did a couple of sets for all your muscle
full
groups,
body.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's not enough for you to, especially as an advanced high level bodybuilder, sure, it's not enough for you to keep making insane gains, but your body's like, okay, yep, we're definitely not losing any muscle.
train really hard going into vacation. There's your deload. Boom. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like it's just it's that's how it works. But then yeah, I think there's some level of enjoyment you have to take from your life, even if you are a competitive bodybuilder. Like, and I think like you mentioned, I think that level of neuroses, you could think about like, oh, I'm getting the idea that I'm getting this much better gains because I didn't miss any sessions, I didn't miss any meals, but the level of neuroses that requires is that stress and that anxiety around it, is that not is that negating some of the benefit? And if I was more chill and didn't worry about these things, would I make it equal to or better gains? I would argue probably yes. I mean, I think the more chill individuals who don't stress things are the ones that when things come up, they're competing or whatever it might be, they are the ones who are generally successful. They are the ones who generally don't sweat the small things and they're just chill.
Yeah, I agree for sure. Um, yeah, full on
Yeah.
with you.
All right. Well, I'll get you out of here in a sec, but I just wanted to touch on exercise technique. So I really love the research you guys have been doing on exercise technique. And I think you're starting to now get a definition for what good technique is, and you're starting to kind of put that out there. I think you had mentioned before, like there's no objective definition in literature of what exercise technique is. One thing I would argue is that we generally have an idea of like if we saw someone lifting, like as an experienced lifter, hey, that's good technique, or hey, that's relatively bad technique. But based on the research that you've done, your interpretation of the existing research, what constitutes good exercise technique to make your best gains?
Yeah. So this, obviously this is just like for hypertrophy, because for strength, like if
Yeah,
you're trying to get the best at squatting, efficiency is of the essence there, right? If you're trying to lift
and
maximal loads.
and specificity, I imagine, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like, but for hypertrophy, and keep in mind, like we still need more research, and absence of evidence ain't evidence of absence. But overall, as long as you're doing most of the things that people have, most people, like, as long as you're doing many of the things that the majority of like respected coaches and I don't know, I'm saying it, and then I'm like, are they all saying it? Anyways, as long as you're ensuring that you're getting a nice stretch on whatever muscle you're working, and we do not know to what extent you need to be, you know, focusing on long muscling. So at the moment, we are in the process of trying to figure that out. So seeing whether, hey, does it make a difference if you do the double plate deficit deadlift or the one plate deficit deadlift, or could you just, as long as you're getting a nice stretch with your regular sort of default range of motion, maybe that's enough. But overall, in getting a solid stretch, and that will depend obviously on the exercise and how it feels and other limitations. But stopping, like let's say you're doing a bicep curl, stopping before you fully extend your elbow, if you're trying to absolutely maximize muscle gains, is probably not the best idea, because why wouldn't you get that full stretch? At the same time, we don't really know if that's going to make a meaningful difference, right? But first thing is range of motion. Make sure that you are getting a solid stretch. We don't have enough data yet to fully say, hey, don't do full range of motion or skip the shortened range of motion. But whatever you do, make sure you get a good stretch. As far as tempo goes, ensure that there is some eccentric control, but you can be relatively flexible. So as long as each rep is taking 2 to 8 seconds, you're covered. And as far as like exercise specific alterations in technique, so like whether you slightly point your elbows out or whatever, we do not really know what effect those alterations can have. It may be that for some exercises, slight changes that allow you to get, a better stretch, or I don't know, make make the exercise feel better. They may play a role, but as it stands, there's no literature on that. There's maybe one or two studies, one on the calf specifically, where they looked at pointing the calves differently and targeting different muscles. But when you go to your gym and you get that old school trainer saying, "Hey, put your thumb over your hand when you're doing lat pull downs to target the lats," like there's no data that shows that that will make a difference. So things are relatively flexible, and I think that that's sort of confirmed by our observations. Like you see people performing exercises with all sorts of like variations that still fall in those sort of broad requirements for exercise technique. So if you're somebody who's absolutely trying to maximize hypertrophy, ensure that you're getting a nice stretch. Make sure that there's some eccentric control, and that you're not going insanely fast when you're doing your repetition. So, make sure that you are spending 2 to 8 seconds per repetition, which is also not that long. 8 maybe, but 2 is not. And at the same time, yeah, just we don't really know if super strict technique makes a big difference versus more lenient technique. So whether the use of external momentum actually has a negative effect, I suspect that some use of external momentum, as long as you're going close to failure, is not going to make a huge difference. But I then make the argument that you're probably not going to be gaining much from it, and having a sort of having a strict having what would the word be, like I want to say gym, like lift training technique etiquette, where unless there's a solid reason for you to YOLO it and start swinging on the lat pull down, there's no need to do it. Like just
Yeah.
keep things relatively strict, get a nice stretch, control your reps, and that's about it. Like it's as simple as that. Losing your mind over whether the eccentric was 3 or 4 seconds. Find what works well, what feels good for each exercise. Because there's some exercises where I'll spend more time, on the eccentric because it feels good. On others, I won't, and
Yeah.
that's about it.
Yeah. So one thing I meant I think is with bigger and stronger lifters, the it's not that I think that they're like the technique, ultra strict technique is super important per se. Like I do think repetitions should look consistent, right? Like I think for standardization, for tracking purposes, having a consistent cadence might be important. Is there any validity to that?
I think that we have to view this on a spectrum. Yes, if you're somebody like, because I feel that people make this point sometimes, but that's not really a concern. Like, yeah, okay, we all know of that one weirdo in our gym where every rep looks different, and they go in one day and they do this, and then the other day they do something completely different. But as long as your reps are looking more or less similar, and you're accounting for some slight deviation from one day to the other, maybe because you're tired, maybe because you are angry, maybe because whatever, I think it's still fine. And overall, if you're trying to maximize gains, your performance increases, you should be aiming to see substantial changes in your performance. So tracking whether you're actually making progress is not going to be much of an issue. Like, yeah, if you are the one guy who has absolutely maxed out every sort of machine and exercise, and you're looking for that extra half a pound, sure, keeping things insanely strict and like almost the same makes sense. But when you're training with a high intensity of effort, you may have the odd set here and there where your last couple of reps look slightly different than the other ones. As long as they're pretty similar, and you're using the same sort of, you're operating in the same framework, and you're like, okay, I'm trying my best to keep things strict, but let me just, I don't know, pull a bit harder now. And okay, you leaned slightly more backwards. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
it's totally fine.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't advocate for being neurotic about technique either, right? Like I think that um shit, what was I gonna say? Um like small deviations probably don't make a difference. I think that if it was like a large deviation across a mesocycle, like say and I think this would actually be violating your rules. Like if you were actually changing the range of motion consistently, maybe even skipping a stretch to get a performance increase, maybe that's not an objective progression.
Yeah.
And one other thing I wanted to mention is I do think that like you had mentioned, like strict technique might not be important for most people. For a very strong lifter, maybe the trade-off is just less favorable on average, right? Like, hey, my injury risk as like a higher level bodybuilder who wants to compete, this just might not be favorable. I might get this much additional gain by swinging up the weight, but like my injury risk, like I know, my biceps are with this weight might be prone to a tear, and just swinging the weight up just might not be worth it. So maybe it'd be better that I just did another set instead of, trying to squeeze out those last couple of reps or something along those lines.
Yeah.
That's how I try
And
to
it's
view it, at
it's
least.
exactly. And like if you are, like if you're the average individual, again, that you want to get jacked and strong, yeah, you can follow these guidelines, but sure, like not having the seat on the chest press be as forward as possible, and if you're not getting the ultimate stretch, is it a big deal? Probably not. Probably
Yeah.
mean, but like if you are somebody who, especially on the enhanced side, you are literally, going above and beyond to gain as much muscle as possible, and you're spending 2 to 3 hours per session in the gym, I personally, I don't get why you wouldn't make those educated bets, even if they're speculative, or even if they end up not giving you, like, it's an extra second.
Yep. Especially when the like for example, like me getting more stretch on a movement. What do I lose by doing that? I mean, I might not
Nothing.
use as much external load, but what is the potential like trade-off? Well, we know that I'm not gonna lose gains, and I might actually get additional gains. So like why
Exactly.
wouldn't I do that? Right? Especially
Like,
for those ones where there's almost no downside. I'm like, we should be doing all of those things if you want to get the best results, in my
yeah,
opinion. You're just hedging your
100%,
bets.
man. And that's where I get annoyed. Like I see that in back in my home country of Greece, where we are a bit behind as far as training practices go, and Although I'm not fully in touch with the scene there, like I do see like bodybuilders are still super meatheads, especially the enhanced ones. And you see these videos where the guy is forcing the 5 plate bench with a spotter, holding the bar, and they're stopping, a few inches of their chest, and they're just in that mid range with help, and it's like, okay, I get it. If it was me and I was like, okay, Pack, the lifter in the gym, wants to have fun, wants to pretend he's benching 5 plates, sloppy technique, who cares? But like, you are supposed to be the guy that your life revolves around muscle building. It just doesn't make sense to me that you potentially cheat yourself out of small but meaningful gains. And why not develop that etiquette and that, you know, it just doesn't make much sense.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I hear it. I like that we had this discussion around this because um I think context is important. I think people sometimes miss the context of your content when you're talking about something like this. Like I think generally you're talking about how do we help most people, right? How do you help most people? Well, they need to not be neurotic about certain variables. Like the I was just reading the volume post earlier, and it's like, yeah, most people are going to get great results with,
Insane results. Yeah.
below 20 sets. If you want to maximize 20 sets and above, great. You know what I mean? So I think context is really important. I think people need to understand that. And I think
Yeah.
that if you're an individual who's pretending that you're concerned with getting the best results and you're not doing these little things, I think you are not being honest with yourself and you're kind of cheating yourself. And I think if
Exactly.
you're an individual who just trains recreationally, maybe it's not that important to be focusing on these little things as much, and focusing on a lot of the basics that you preach, that I preach: progressive overload, training with an adequate amount of volume, not
Yeah.
being neurotic about your technique, but having some control, getting some length and work. Those are the things you should be focusing on and doing that consistently over time.
Yeah. And and I'd also like to say, like, you have to have some, like, it's fine to say, oh, it's fun to do so, but there comes a point where we can argue. Like, obviously, like, you can be a reductionist and say, bro, I love it, it's fun. But there comes a point where, and I see that with some people in the gym, where everything looks like absolute dog crap, and it's like, sure,
It's fun.
they're still gonna make some gains, blah 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 blah, but it's like, okay, yeah, you're a recreational lifter. Are you really having that much more fun YOLOing the face pulls? Like, I get the odd set with the lads on the bench press where one more bro and your friend is essentially upright rowing it. But what are you getting from like poor technique on everything? Like, okay, just take a step back, check your ego.
Right, right. Well, I think everybody should just sit down and say, why am I in the gym? Am I in
Yeah,
the gym
spot on.
purely for enjoyment? Okay, cool. Do whatever the fuck you want. Am I in the gym to have some fun and make gains? Okay, maybe we should still be following some of these guidelines, like knowing that, like, hey, I can use pretty much any exercise I want for hypertrophy, as long as I have a relatively consistent technique. Am I in the gym to make the best gains possible? Okay, I should be doing all these little things on top of all of the basics consistently, right?
Yep.
So I think that you need to sit down and be honest with yourself about why you're in the gym in the first place. And then that can help to determine where you lay on the spectrum of like how much you need to even be worrying about any of these nuanced details.
Yeah, spot on, man. Spot on. But
Yeah.
hey, people are not going to listen. They're still going to argue, and we're still going to be talking among us and saying, "Hey, I agree." And
Yes, let's just do this podcast every week for eternity, and maybe some people will catch on at some point.
I love it, man. No, it's been nice. It feels like a nice venting session, and it's good to hear
Yes.
from a thinking lifter from the other side of things. Because, like, in your world as well, um, you know, I can imagine there's a lot of like, yeah,
Yeah.
bro,
I
Branch Warren.
I do feel like an outlier a lot of the time. So a lot of my friends are on the internet, and so that's why I book people for podcasts so I can just vent to them basically.
I appreciate it.
No, man, I appreciate you. Last question, and then I'll get you out of here, Pack. This is not a long question at all, but what is your number one hype song if you need to hit a lift?
Easy, very easy question. There's one song, if you ever see me PR on anything, you'll see me singing that song. So any PR video that I've played, maybe with the exception of one or two, I listen to A Team by Travis Scott, and I specifically time the lift every time with a specific part of the song. So
No shit.
uh, you can see like I've pinned my deadlift PR right now, which is 634, and I've synchronized the song with me. So if you look at the video, I am lip syncing the song. And yeah, it's A Team, bro. Like that song, I do not listen to that song aside from PR attempts.
Right. Because
Because
it'll
once,
dull the effect.
yes, it's amazing. I have a specific playlist for PRs and a specific sequence of songs that I listen to, and they're mostly Travis Scott. I'm a big hip hop head, an old school hip hop
Me
head,
too.
and blah blah blah. But and I have like MF Doom, like every possible vinyl you can imagine from MF Doom, including very rare vinyls, and some of them twice. But sorry for the flex. But yeah, and I also have these sliders by MF Doom.
No
Woohoo!
shit. I didn't realize you were such
Yeah,
a huge MF Doom fan. I've actually never listened to
huge,
MF
bro.
Doom.
It's
So I
okay.
think I
It's I don't know. Do you you also consume recreational substances that do you
absolutely.
smoke weed?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like maybe do that and like pull up Genius, Genius as in Rap Genius, read the lyrics, read the puns. I don't know. Doom for me
Okay.
has a big place in my heart.
I absolutely will do that. That sounds like a
It's
good
it's
time
a
to me.
heavy, it's not an easy sell though. Keep in mind, like it's not like, oh, old school rap where you're like, oh, nice. Like Doom can get a bit too nerdy, but I think you will like it judging
Yeah.
by, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I also have respect for it. I mean, like I have a pretty obscure music taste, so I can respect when other people do as well. Like I think that maybe like 1% of people listen to the type of rap I listen to.
What do you listen to?
So like my top played on Spotify last year was Sada Baby and Chief Keef. So
Chief Keef. Okay, yeah, fair enough.
yeah,
Nice.
Sada Baby you probably haven't heard of. He's more niche out of shit. Is he out of Detroit? I think he's out of Detroit. Yeah.
I'm a huge UK scene. Like I'm a huge Greek hip hop scene nerd, but I lately listened mostly to UK rap. Yeah, I don't know. It's we can chat hip hop like all day. Yeah.
Yes, I would love to get
I'll
some.
send you some of
Yes, please,
my old shit as
please,
well.
please. All right, well, I'll get you out of your pack, dude. Thank you so much for the conversation. It was
Thank
awesome,
you.
refreshing, and yeah, dude. Well, where can people reach you? If socials, all that stuff. Plug away, please.
So if you go on Instagram and type dr double underscore pak, you can find me there, and all my other links, research, me shirts, and so on and so forth, they're in my bio, and my YouTube channel is Dr. Pack. So if you YouTube Dr. Pack, you'll see me pop up. Real
Yes,
doctor.
sir. Real doctor. If you need medical advice, don't you can go to Pack, but he's probably going to tell you the minimum effective dose for hypertrophy, which could also be effective for you. So I would say reach out to Dr. Pack in that
Not
case.
medical advice.
Not
Not a
medical
licensed
advice.
physician. Peace.
Peace. Hey, I just wanted to take a moment and thank you all for watching. If you made it this far, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you'd like free training templates, courses, and expert advice, click the link below to join my free community. I'll catch you guys next time.